Imagine calling the police on a government official right inside a government building, only to find out that, well, the government itself holds the only security footage of the incident.
Yeah, and they completely refuse to tell you the procedural password to actually get it.
Right. It's wild. And today, we are looking at exactly that scenario. Welcome to the deep dive. We have a seriously fascinating stack of sources today.
We really do. It's this tense trail of email correspondence from November 2025.
Yeah, and it basically culminates in a formal administrative grievance.
Which is a big deal.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to trace how a seemingly simple request for video evidence spirals into this massive complex showdown over administrative rules, disability rights, and bureaucratic transparency.
It really is a wild paper trail.
Okay.
And to understand the mechanics of what happens in these documents, we have to look at the players and, of course, the inciting incident.
Right, setting the stage.
Exactly. So on one side, we have Ryan Michaels. He is acting as a self-represented litigant.
Meaning he has no lawyer, right?
Correct, no lawyer. And the documents also note he is a 100% disabled veteran.
Okay, got it.
Then on the other side is Barbara Cardone. She's the Director of Legal Affairs and Public Relations for the Maine Judicial Branch.
Right. And the incident that sets this whole thing off happens on October 30th, 2025 at the Biddeford District Court.
Yes, in Maine.
Right. So Michaels is there for a protection from abuse hearing. The case is noted as Michaels versus Guerrero. And for those of you who haven't been in one, a protection from abuse hearing is often highly emotional.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, usually involving restraining orders and severe interpersonal conflict. Tensions are already running extremely high just by the sheer nature of the proceedings.
Exactly. And according to Michael's account in these sources, the situation actually escalates before the hearing even gets underway.
Wait, before he even gets into the hearing?
Yeah. He alleges that a judicial marshal became verbally aggressive with him. And then he claims another marshal actually placed hands on his chest and physically pushed him backward, completely out of courtroom 1.
Wow. And so he calls 911.
Right. He immediately called 911 right there to report the physical contact.
Which brings us to the core of the request. Michaels wants the preserved security footage of that specific interaction in courtroom 1.
Makes sense.
Yeah, his first instinct, which is exactly what, most of you listening would probably do if you wanted government records, is to file a request under Maine's Freedom of Access Act.
Which is usually called FOAA.
Right, FOAA. So he sends this formal request to the court, but Barbara Cardone denies it, stating simply that the judicial branch is not subject to FOAA.
Yeah, which always surprises people.
Right. I mean, why wouldn't a public courthouse be subject to a public records law?
Well, it mostly comes down to the separation of powers. Freedom of information laws, like FOAA, they're typically drafted by legislatures to apply to the executive branch and, local municipalities.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, judiciaries often argue that they must govern their own records to protect the integrity of the courts, ongoing litigation, and, judicial independence. So they're generally exempt from standard public records requests.
Okay, let's unpack this. The state's standard transparency law doesn't apply. But Cardone doesn't just, hang up the phone on him, so to speak.
Yeah, she doesn't.
She points Michaels to a specific administrative order called JB 1501. What exactly is that?
So JB 1501 is an internal Maine Supreme Judicial Court order. Because the courts aren't subject to FOAA, like we just talked about, they have to create their own internal rules for how the public can access things like court documents.
Or in this case, security video footage.
Exactly. This specific order governs the circumstances under which the judicial branch is allowed to release that footage.
Okay, so Michaels goes and actually reads JB 1501.
Right, he does his homework.
He really does. And he replies to Cardone pointing out that this internal rule actually has explicit exceptions where footage is allowed to be released. And his situation seems to fit the criteria perfectly.
It really does.
I mean, the exceptions include public safety concerns, allegations of misconduct by judicial branch personnel, disability discrimination, and situations where a recording is needed for an investigation.
Right. So Michaels writes back and outlines his request using the very criteria she just provided him.
Which is smart.
Very smart. He alleges martial misconduct, he raises the public safety concerns, and he cites his status as a disabled litigant. The logic is totally straightforward. He meets the explicit exceptions detailed in the administrative order, so the footage should be released.
But it isn't.
Nope.
And this is where the bureaucratic friction really starts. Cardone replies and confirms that the video from courtroom 1 exists and she says it has been preserved.
Which is a crucial detail.
Yeah, they have the tape. But she tells him, and I quote, "I leave it to you to comply with the terms of the administrative order in taking any further action."
Yeah, that line is incredible.
Right. She confirms the video exists, she points to the rule, but provides literally zero explanation of what specific form, petition, or motion is actually required.
Yeah.
It feels like being told, a store is closed, but the manager hands you a VIP pass, and when you try to use the VIP pass, the door is still locked.
That is a perfect analogy.
It's like a computer throwing an error code that says, task failed, refer to manual, but when you open the manual, the pages are totally blank. They aren't explicitly breaking the rule, they're weaponizing the missing information.
Yeah, that is exactly the mechanic of procedural stonewalling. Administrative law relies heavily on specific forms and, filing deadlines.
Right.
By telling a citizen to comply without defining the actual method of compliance, the agency effectively paralyzes the request. Michaels repeatedly asks, what specific step must I take? Who do I direct the request to?
And what does he get?
Nothing but instructions to go back and read the rule.
Wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. If Michaels is acting as his own lawyer, couldn't Cardone's reluctance to give specific steps just be standard legal ethics?
Oh, so?
Well, in the next email, she explicitly states she cannot give legal advice. But she does offer a suggestion, saying a subpoena to the state court administrator might be the vehicle he needs. Couldn't that just be genuine, standard legal advice? Why are we assuming this is a stonewalling tactic?
That is a great question. Government lawyers absolutely cannot give legal advice to private citizens. That's true. But there is a massive difference between legal advice and administrative procedure.
Okay, explain that difference.
Telling a citizen how to file a form within your own agency's administrative framework is procedural guidance. It's not legal advice. When you look at her suggestion of a subpoena, you really have to understand what a subpoena actually is.
Right, it's not just a polite request.
Far from it. It is a formal, adversarial legal command. It requires navigating court clerks, sometimes paying fees, properly serving the document, and dealing with potential motions to quash. It is a massive, burdensome hurdle.
And Michaels catches this immediately.
He does.
He pushes back, asking why a self-represented disabled citizen would need to formally subpoena the judicial branch just to get evidence of the judicial branch's own alleged misconduct.
Which is a very fair point.
Especially when JB 1501 is an internal administrative policy, not a criminal statute. I mean, you shouldn't need a court order to trigger an internal administrative review, right? Is this standard practice? If an agency denies a request, aren't they usually required to state who is denying it and under what authority?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the policy is being used. Precisely because it's an internal rule, if the policy was explicitly written to allow the release of footage for internal misconduct investigations, forcing a citizen to initiate a separate adversarial legal subpoena process completely bypasses the intent of having an internal administrative rule in the first place.
Yeah, it totally negates the rule.
Exactly. So Michaels is pressing for basic administrative due process. He wants to know who made the decision to deny his request, what their official title is, and what specific procedural step of GB 1501 he failed to meet.
But Cardone's responses just construct this impenetrable wall. She states, and again I'm quoting, "Until such time as the procedure set forth in the administrative order is complied with, the denial of your request for the security footage remains in place."
Yeah.
But she still refuses to confirm if a subpoena is the required method or just an optional one.
Right. She just says it, quote, might be the vehicle.
Wow.
So by holding the denial in place based on a failure to comply with a procedure while actively refusing to define what that procedure actually is, the system essentially traps him.
Yeah, he's stuck.
He can't comply because he doesn't know the steps, and he can't appeal the denial because he doesn't know who officially issued it or under what authority.
You know, for those of you listening, you've probably experienced a milder version of this in your own life.
Oh, for sure.
Like trying to cancel a gym membership or dispute a cable bill where a customer service just keeps transferring you to dead ends and they refuse to give you the direct cancellation form. What we see in these documents is that government agencies can use this exact same tactic of attrition.
Yeah, wear them down.
Exactly. They rely on the assumption that if they make the process confusing enough, you will eventually just get tired and give up.
But Michaels doesn't give up.
No, he doesn't.
When the internal state rules create a dead end, he looks for a higher authority. And that brings us to federal law.
This is my favorite part of the whole document stack.
It's brilliant. He employs a highly strategic pivot, shifting the entire framework of his request. He leans into his status as a disabled veteran and argues that his ability to safely access a public court proceeding was directly impacted by the alleged actions of the marshals.
Right.
So he formally asks that his email correspondence be treated as a Title II ADA accommodation request under federal law, specifically citing 28 CFR Part 35.
Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, let's really break down how this works mechanically because this changes the whole dynamic of the conversation.
It completely shifts the power balance.
Yeah. Title II applies specifically to state and local government services, which includes courts. And 28 CFR Part 35 dictates exactly how a government entity must handle an ADA request. If they want to deny an ADA accommodation, they can't just ignore it or say, refer to the manual.
Exactly. Federal law forces the government's hand here. Under Part 35, if a public entity denies a request, they must provide a written determination citing specific legal grounds.
They have to show their work.
Yes. They usually have to prove that granting the request would cause an, quote, undue financial or administrative burden, or a fundamental alteration of their services. And crucially, this written federal determination must include the name and title of the deciding official.
Which is exactly what Michaels has been asking for this whole time.
Right. And on top of that, Michaels also formally demands the contact information for the Judicial Branch's ADA coordinator.
So how does Cardone respond to this sudden injection of federal law? She claims two things, right? First, that the state administrative order, JB 15-E01, doesn't mention the ADA. And second, she says, because Michaels never disclosed the nature of his disability, the judicial branch cannot evaluate any request under the ADA.
Which is a fascinating defense, because Michaels immediately points out a glaring contradiction in her logic.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because he did disclose his disability.
He absolutely did.
He explicitly stated in the earlier emails that he is a 100% disabled veteran. I was honestly so confused by her response when I read that. I mean, can a government agency really demand detailed medical documentation just to process a procedural request about physically accessing a courtroom? Especially when the disability status has already been plainly stated.
No, they generally cannot. And this is where Michael shows a really deep understanding of how Title II actually functions. Under the ADA, public entities cannot require detailed medical documentation if a disability is obvious or has already been disclosed.
Right, unless it's like a super specific thing.
Yeah, unless they need it to understand how to fulfill a very specific, complex accommodation.
Ugh.
But furthermore, they cannot refuse to process a request entirely just because they want more medical information.
And his request for the video is directly related to a barrier he faced while trying to physically access his scheduled hearing. It's not some abstract request.
Yes, Michaels uses federal law to essentially trap the bureaucracy in its own logic.
How so?
Well, Cardone had previously stated that his request for the footage remains denied under the state rule, right?
Right.
So Michaels points out that by formally maintaining that denial after he invoked the ADA, Cardone has legally issued an ADA denial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And by issuing an ADA denial, she automatically triggers all the federal reporting requirements we just talked about.
The written explanation, citing the specific reasons of undue burden and naming the official.
Exactly. These are all the transparency mechanisms she is actively refusing to provide.
So, faced with this highly specific, legally cited list of federal ADA compliance failures, what does the judicial branch do? We reach the climax of the email thread.
It's quite the response.
Cardone replies with just 2 sentences. I refer you back to my previous emails. I am not going to comment further.
Yeah, that is the sound of the administrative door slamming shut. It is the final, total shutdown of communication.
But this is where the strategy becomes really important for Michaels. He knows he is being stonewalled, so he doesn't just fire off an angry reply.
No, that wouldn't help him.
Right. He makes a calculated move to build what is called the administrative record. He writes an email titled, Final Clarification for the Administrative Record. Why is building this record so crucial in this kind of dispute?
Because in administrative law, if you eventually want to sue an agency or, say, bring in a federal oversight body, you first have to prove that you exhausted all administrative remedies.
You have to show you tried everything locally first.
Exactly. Courts need to see that you tried every possible internal option before they will step in and intervene. Michael's final email is basically the legal equivalent of a receipt.
A receipt, I like that.
Yeah, he methodically lists every single failure of the judicial branch in the exchange. He documents that they issued a final denial. He documents their refusal to issue the required written ADA determination.
He gets it all in writing.
Yep. He notes the refusal to identify the ADA coordinator, and he highlights their ongoing refusal to explain how to even comply with JB 1501.
By writing this, he is establishing undeniable proof that he has asked for the procedure, the decision maker, the coordinator, and the forms, and has been denied at literally every turn.
Right.
He is effectively showing that the judicial branch itself has closed off all internal review, which transitions us to the logical escalation of this conflict, and the second major document in our sources, Michael's formal ADA Title II grievance.
Right. He isn't just complaining to customer service anymore. He is formally documenting federal civil rights violations.
Yeah.
He submits this grievance to the Maine Judicial Branch, detailing the obstruction of his physical access to the courts and the subsequent denial of his accommodation. And within this formal grievance, there's a piece of evidence that changes the whole context of the dispute. It's labeled Exhibit A.
Oh, Exhibit A. This part is wild. So Exhibit A points to a prior incident from September 2025.
Just a month before the Biddeford Courthouse incident.
Exactly. And this prior incident also involved correspondence with Barbara Cardone regarding administrative records. And in that September exchange, Michaels similarly invoked the ADA.
And according to the grievance, Cardone acknowledged in September that the request raised ADA issues. She explicitly wrote, "I will have your request reviewed as it pertains to the ADA."
But then what happened?
Well, just like in November, she failed to identify the ADA coordinator or the actual decision maker. She ended that September exchange by stating, "I will not be engaging further in a debate about the legal sufficiency of the response."
So by including Exhibit A, Michaels is establishing a documented repeating pattern of behavior. It shows that this wasn't just, a one-off misunderstanding or someone having a bad day at the office. The pattern is acknowledge the request, refuse to provide the procedural pathways, and then shut down communication entirely when pressed for the legal justification.
And establishing a pattern is vital for a federal grievance because it demonstrates that the stonewalling is systemic, not accidental.
It's built into the process.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
strengthens his case immensely by showing a routine practice of evading ADA compliance mechanisms. Because, if an agency makes a single mistake, a federal oversight body might just tell them to correct it.
Give them a slap on the wrist.
Right. But if an agency has a documented policy of evasion, well, that warrants a much deeper investigation.
So Michaels wraps up this formal grievance by laying out his requested remedies. He wants his request treated properly as a Title II ADA accommodation. He wants the written determination required by federal law, including the name of the official who denied him.
Standard ADA stuff.
Right. He wants the contact info for the ADA coordinator and clear procedural guidance for how to actually use the state's JB 1501 rule. But he also includes an ultimate warning.
The escalation.
Exactly. He states that depending on their response, he may refer the entire matter to the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the Maine Human Rights Commission, and appropriate legislative oversight bodies.
And that really brings us to the broader implications of this deep dive.
So what does this all actually mean?
Well, the core tension here is profound. The judicial branch is the very system designed by our society to interpret the law, to uphold civil rights, and to ensure due process.
Right.
Yet in these documents, that exact branch of government is being accused by a citizen of actively circumventing federal disability laws and its own administrative procedures just to protect its own personnel.
It turns the whole concept of the justice system upside down. You expect the courts to be the neutral referee,
Always.
but here they are the opposing team, and they are basically refusing to show the citizen the playbook.
It raises a really critical question about the mechanics of oversight. When the internal policies of a state agency conflict with federal transparency and accessibility laws, how can a self-represented citizen realistically bridge that gap?
It seems almost impossible.
It really does. Michaels had to possess a near-expert understanding of the Code of Federal Regulations just to properly document his denial. The reality is most people wouldn't have known about Title II or 28 CFR Part 35.
No, definitely not.
Most people would have just given up after that first FOAA rejection.
And that is exactly how administrative attrition works. But Michaels built an ironclad administrative record instead. He turned their silence and ambiguity into evidence.
It really is a remarkable look at how complex self-advocacy has to be when you are up against a bureaucracy.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the dense, frustrating, but incredibly important mechanics of judicial transparency. As you go about your day, we want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Something to chew on.
When the courts themselves control the evidence of their own potential misconduct, and they alone get to write the administrative rules on how that evidence is released. Wait, let me rephrase that. When they get to write the rules on how that evidence is released, who is actually left to hold the justice system accountable